American credit card debt has just smashed through $1 trillion, reaching a record high of $1.2 trillion in the second quarter of 2025, the highest level in the nation's history. Families are not saving anymore. They are surviving on borrowed time. And the warning signs are everywhere, hiding in plain sight. The groceries you place in your cart, the bill taped to your door, the streetlight that never turns back on. These are not random inconveniences. They are the 10 unmistakable signs that everyday life in America is collapsing. Today, we will pull back the curtain. We will trace the chain from electricity cutoffs to eviction notices, from wages that cannot keep up to debts that cannot be repaid. And when we reach sign number 3, you will see a number so staggering, it will stop you in your tracks. Stay until sign number 2, because that is where only the insiders will recognize what's really happening. And sign number 1 will reveal the moment when everyday struggle turns into permanent collapse. This is not tomorrow's nightmare. It is America in 2025. Utility bills, once a predictable line on the family budget, are now a wrecking ball. Across America, millions of households are slipping into arrears, unable to keep up with the rising costs of heat, light, and water. 1 in 6 families are now behind on their utility bills, a statistic so staggering it reveals how fragile daily life has become in 2025. Electricity prices have surged more than 20% in just the last 3 years, outpacing wage growth and leaving families with impossible choices. In states from Texas to California, natural gas bills have doubled compared to their pre-pandemic levels. For households already stretched thin, even a small spike in the monthly bill can be the final push toward disconnection. And disconnections are spreading. In some regions, shutoffs have risen by more than 30% since 2022. Entire neighborhoods are darkening, not because of storms, but because families cannot pay to keep the lights on. The crisis extends beyond energy. Water utilities are reporting record levels of non-payment, with tens of thousands of households each month facing termination notices. A single missed paycheck or medical bill can cascade into a loss of basic services, the very foundations of modern life. Families are stockpiling candles and portable heaters, as if preparing for war against their own utility providers. Behind these statistics is a deeper collapse, a society where the essentials of life are no longer guaranteed, even for those working full-time jobs. Once, Americans could rely on the promise that if you showed up to work, your lights would stay on. That trust has been shattered. Now, utility companies talk of arrears management programs, as if mass disconnection were a normal condition of life in a first-world nation. This utility shock is not a distant or isolated event. It is a spreading contagion. From rural towns where residents burn firewood indoors just to stay warm, to urban centers where families live by extension cords run from a neighbor's outlet, the collapse of affordability in utilities is reshaping how Americans live day to day. And if utility costs can spiral out of reach, what about the most basic necessity of all, food? When the next sign reveals the true scale of America's grocery pain, the numbers will be even harder to swallow. The grocery aisle has become America's silent battlefield. What was once routine, filling a cart with the basics, now feels like a luxury reserved for the wealthy. The numbers do not lie. Since 2020, the cost of a simple basket of staples, milk, bread, eggs, and rice has risen by more than 25%. Wages, meanwhile, have crawled forward by less than half that pace. The math is brutal. Families are losing ground every single week. Food inflation may have cooled from its peak, but the damage lingers. In the past year alone, the average American household spent nearly 11% of its disposable income on groceries, the highest share since the late 1970s. For low-income families, that number is far higher, crossing 15%. What used to be a manageable expense has morphed into an unrelenting squeeze, forcing impossible choices at the checkout line. The evidence is visible beyond the supermarket shelves. Food banks report record demand, with some cities seeing double the traffic of just 5 years ago. Volunteers describe lines wrapping around blocks, stretching longer each month as families with 2 working parents still cannot afford to keep pantries stocked. National surveys reveal that 1 in 10 adults admit to skipping meals so their children can eat. In 2025, hunger is no longer a problem of the margins. It is creeping into the middle class. And there is a darker undercurrent, shrinkflation. Packages shrink while prices remain high, leaving shoppers paying more for less. A box that once carried 16 ounces now holds 12. Cereal bags, chips, even bottles of juice, all quietly reduced, all silently eroding the family budget. Customers sense the scam, but powerless to stop it, they keep scanning items that offer less nourishment for more money. The grocery store has become a place of dread. Parents avoid taking children along, embarrassed by how much they must put back before reaching the register. The cashier's screen becomes a mirror of national decline, flashing numbers that expose the fragility of modern living. When the essentials of life, food, water, heat, are priced beyond reach, the collapse is no longer theoretical. It is lived, day to day, aisle by aisle. And if the grocery store is breaking families, the next sign reveals the invisible chain reaction spreading through America's financial system. Because behind the rising cost of food lies an even greater storm, a debt spiral that is swallowing households whole. Rent has become America's cruelest tax, a fee for simply existing. In city after city, the numbers tell a story of quiet eviction. More than half of renters in major metropolitan areas now spend over 50% of their income just to keep a roof overhead. Economists once warned that 30% was the threshold for affordability. That line is no longer just crossed, it is erased. The math is merciless. Median rents have surged more than 25% in just 4 years, while real wages have failed to keep pace. For many households, the monthly payment has become larger than the combined cost of food, utilities, and transportation. Families are draining savings, maxing out credit cards, and taking on second jobs, all to pay landlords who demand more each year. And when the math finally breaks, the descent is swift. Across America, car encampments are spreading, visible even from the interstate. Parking lots of big box stores and church grounds have turned into makeshift neighborhoods of sedans, minivans, and campers. Tens of thousands now sleep in vehicles, hiding from police by night and trying to maintain normal routines by day. For many, the car is the last barrier before the street. Tent cities, once thought to be the shame of only a few coastal hubs, now rise in the Midwest, the South, and the Great Plains. Encampments sprawl under freeway, overpasses, along railroad tracks, and behind strip malls. Local governments cycle through eviction sweeps, but the tents always return. More of them, closer together, spreading like wildfire across the American landscape. Behind every tent is a story. A teacher priced out of her own district, a nurse working double shifts who cannot afford a one-bedroom, a retiree forced out by rent hikes on a fixed income. Housing is no longer just shelter. It has become a casino bet where the working class always loses. And this collapse does not stay contained to rent alone. When families are devoting half or more of their income to housing, something else has to give. Prescriptions go unfilled. Utility bills remain unpaid. Medical visits are postponed until it is too late. The collapse of housing affordability is not just forcing people from apartments into cars. It is forcing families into deadly trade-offs between shelter and survival itself. And those trade-offs bring us to the next sign, where medicine, debt, and despair collide. When rent and groceries devour half a paycheck, something else must be sacrificed. Increasingly, that sacrifice is health. Across America, families are forced into impossible medical trade-offs, choosing between prescriptions and housing, between doctor visits and keeping the lights on. It is a collapse measured not just in dollars, but in lives. The data is merciless. Nearly 1 in 5 adults admit they have skipped filling a prescription because of cost. Insulin, asthma inhalers, antibiotics. Medicines once considered basic are now luxuries for millions. Medical debt remains the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States, with more than 100 million people carrying some form of healthcare debt. For many, a single emergency room visit can spark years of financial ruin. Even households with insurance are not spared. Deductibles have more than doubled over the last 2 decades, leaving families exposed to thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket costs before coverage begins. The average annual premium for employer-based family insurance now exceeds $23,000, more than the price of a modest new car. Working full-time no longer guarantees protection. The collapse is visible in shuttered rural hospitals, hundreds of them closed in the last decade, leaving entire regions without basic emergency care. In small towns, residents must drive hours for urgent treatment, a delay that can turn treatable conditions into tragedies. In urban centers, emergency rooms overflow, not just with patients, but with people seeking refuge from the cold or a place to sleep when homelessness and medical need collide. Behind these statistics are millions of quiet calculations. A mother cutting pills in half to stretch prescriptions, a father postponing surgery until the pain is unbearable, a retiree choosing heat over heart medication. These trade-offs spread silently, but their consequences will echo for decades in shorter lifespans, sicker populations, and families bankrupted by bills they never expected. America was once promised that work and sacrifice would guarantee security, but when health itself becomes negotiable, the social contract frays. A society where citizens must gamble with medicine is not stable. It is collapsing. And these choices between shelter and survival do not end at the pharmacy. The next sign reveals how even wages, once a symbol of security, have become an illusion. Nominally rising, but in reality devoured by the cost of living, America's paycheck is shrinking before our eyes. On paper, wages are rising. Headlines boast of paychecks growing across the country, of employers offering more than ever before. But this is the cruelest illusion of all. Because when you strip away the numbers and measure wages against the real cost of living, the American paycheck is shrinking. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports nominal wages up by more than 4% in the past year. But inflation for the essentials, food, rent, utilities, childcare, healthcare, has climbed even faster. The numbers show it plainly. Real purchasing power for American workers has dropped by nearly 3% since 2019. Every raise feels like quicksand, swallowed up before it reaches the family budget. Look closely at the national charts. Wages rise in neat, upward lines. But beside them, rent soars faster, groceries spike higher, medical costs leap off the page. The divergence is the story of a collapsing middle class, an economy where workers are told they are earning more, but their lives show less. For millions, this illusion creates a dangerous cycle. Workers cling to the hope that a pay bump will ease the pressure, only to discover that the new paycheck covers fewer groceries, less rent, fewer bills. Families feel the collapse not in statistics, but in the cart they cannot fill, the gas tank they cannot top off, the savings account they cannot rebuild. The illusion also erodes trust. How can politicians and economists claim prosperity while Americans are working more hours and still falling behind? Surveys reveal that more than 60% of citizens now believe their children will be worse off financially than they are, the highest share in modern history. This pessimism is not paranoia. It is the lived reality of a paycheck that looks bigger but buys less. And the collapse spreads beyond households. Small businesses lose customers because communities have no disposable income left. Cities lose sales tax revenue as families cut spending. The entire economy contracts, even while official statistics glow with the mirage of rising wages. This is the great national zoom out. In America, where the numbers suggest progress, but daily life reveals decline. Where growth charts show abundance, but reality shows collapse. And if wages are failing to protect families, what happens when another pillar of stability, childcare, and education, is also out of reach? The next sign reveals how even the foundation of raising children is now beyond the grasp of millions. For millions of American families, the collapse of affordability is clearest not in the grocery aisle or the rent bill, but in the daycare center. Childcare has become so expensive that it now rivals, and often exceeds, the cost of rent. In more than half the states, the average annual price of infant care is higher than a year's tuition at a public college. For a single parent, that cost can consume more than 60% of income, leaving nothing left for housing, food, or savings. The arithmetic is devastating. In 2025, the average cost of center-based childcare for one infant is more than $12,000 per year. For families with 2 young children, the bill often exceeds $24,000, greater than the median rent in most major cities. For many households, the math simply does not add up. Mothers and fathers are forced out of the workforce, not because they lack skills or opportunity, but because they cannot afford to keep working. The collapse shows up in labor statistics. Nearly 1 in 5 parents report quitting a job, turning down a promotion, or reducing hours because of childcare costs. Employers complain of labor shortages, yet the workers exist, trapped at home, priced out of participation. Schools are not spared. Teacher shortages have grown so severe that dozens of districts across the nation have moved to 4-day weeks. Some classrooms are staffed by rotating substitutes. Others rely on virtual instruction, even as parents demand in-person learning. The foundation of childhood education is fracturing under financial pressure and staff exhaustion. These trade-offs carry generational costs. Children who miss stable early education face long-term developmental setbacks. Parents who step out of the workforce often never recover the lost wages, missing raises, retirement contributions, and career advancement. The collapse of childcare is not just a crisis for families. It is a slow-motion erosion of America's future economic base. Even those who manage to pay the bills find themselves on the edge. Waiting lists stretch for months, sometimes years. Daycares close abruptly, leaving parents scrambling. And the workers inside these centers, often underpaid and overwhelmed, are leaving in droves, further shrinking supply. The result is a tightening spiral. Fewer providers, higher costs, more families locked out. This is what collapse looks like. A nation where raising children is unaffordable, and where the simple act of going to work becomes an economic impossibility. And if families are being crushed by childcare, the pressure only intensifies when the bills they cannot avoid, their debts, begin to spiral out of control. Debt has become America's lifeline, and its noose. As wages falter and bills rise, millions turn to credit cards, auto loans, and payday lenders to bridge the gap. But what once felt like a safety net is now pulling families under. The numbers are staggering. Total credit card balances in the United States have surged past $1 trillion, an all-time record. The average household balance now exceeds $6,000, with interest rates approaching 25%. For many, the monthly minimum payment alone is larger than their grocery bill. Auto loans are collapsing too. Delinquencies on car notes have reached levels not seen since the Great Recession of 2008. Families who once counted on a car to get to work are now falling behind, facing repossessions that erase mobility and jobs in a single stroke. Student loan repayments, paused for years, have returned with full force. Millions are juggling housing costs, food, and now payments that feel impossible to meet. For many young adults, debt has become a lifelong sentence. The collapse reveals itself in survival math. Households decide which bills to ignore. Pay the rent, skip the car. Pay the car, skip the hospital. Pay the hospital, skip the credit card. Economists call this strategic non-payment. But for families, it is simply desperation. Behind these numbers are lives unraveling. A family forced to choose between feeding their children or keeping the car to get to work. A retiree living off credit just to pay for heat. A young graduate drowning in interest, watching balances grow larger no matter how faithfully they pay. This spiral is not just personal, it is national. A society built on credit cannot withstand an avalanche of defaults. Every unpaid balance weakens banks, strains small lenders, and ripples through communities. Collapse is not abstract. It is a contagion spreading from household budgets to the entire economy. And the data spike is brutal. Delinquency rates have climbed by double digits in just 2 years. It is not 1 or 2 missed payments. It is millions. If debt is already swallowing the middle class, what happens when the roof itself is ripped away? The next sign will reveal how silent waves of eviction are turning the American dream into the American disaster. The collapse of the American dream is not loud. It is quiet. It is the sound of furniture being dragged across a floor at midnight, the whisper of a family slipping out before the sheriff arrives. It is the silent eviction of the middle class. For decades, eviction was seen as the scourge of the poor. But in 2025, it has spread into the very heart of America's working households. Families with steady jobs, with children in school, with cars in the driveway, all now face the threat of losing their homes. The numbers are staggering. Eviction filings have surged back to, and in many cities, above their pre-pandemic highs. In places like Atlanta, Houston, and Las Vegas, filings have jumped by double digits in just 1 year. Courts are clogged with cases, sheriffs work overtime, and families shuffle between couches, motels, and shelters. The data spike is unmistakable. 1 in 5 renters nationwide is at risk of eviction within the next 12 months. That is not a statistic of poverty. that is a statistic of collapse. Because when even the middle class cannot hold on to their homes, the entire system is breaking. The signs are visible everywhere. Suburban neighborhoods dotted with moving trucks, apartment parking lots lined with discarded furniture, storage units filled to capacity with belongings of families who thought they had stability, children switching schools mid-year, carrying the trauma of displacement in backpacks heavier than their books. And this collapse does not stop at the curb. Evictions ripple outward, families lose jobs when forced to move far from work, children fall behind when pulled out of classrooms, cities lose tax revenue as neighborhoods hollow out. The community itself begins to unravel. The silent middle-class eviction is not a single tragedy. It is a national contagion. The middle tier of society, once the backbone of the nation, is being pushed into the same instability that once haunted only the margins. And when eviction becomes the norm, survival takes on a new meaning. Because if homes can be lost overnight, what good is working harder? What good is juggling multiple jobs? The next sign will show us a nation where people labor longer, hustle harder, and still have less. The American work ethic was once a badge of honor. Hard work promised stability, a home, a future for your children. But in 2025, the cruelest irony is clear. Americans are working more than ever and ending up with less. Multi-job households are no longer the exception. They are the new normal. Surveys show nearly half of working adults now rely on second or third jobs just to cover the basics. Night shifts bleed into morning commutes. Weekends dissolve into side hustles. Families see each other less. And yet the bills keep piling higher. The small businesses that once provided extra income are vanishing. Neighborhood diners, repair shops, and hardware stores shutter under rising costs. For the handyman who once picked up cash jobs, fixing a sink or patching a roof, the calls no longer come. The local economy is drying out, and with it, the last safety net for the working class. The numbers confirm what workers already feel. Since 2019, productivity has risen, but real wages have not kept pace with the cost of living. The illusion of progress hides the truth. Americans are laboring harder while falling further behind. Exhaustion grows, but wealth shrinks. Even the second job is no shield. Gig work, driving, deliveries, odd jobs, once promised flexibility, now pays pennies after expenses. Workers wear out cars, bodies, and minds in an endless loop that never builds stability. The so-called hustle economy is not a ladder upward. It is a treadmill going nowhere. The human toll is immense. Parents trade time with children for time on the clock. Young adults delay marriage and family because survival consumes every hour. Health declines as stress and fatigue carve away at life expectancy. What was once called the American dream now looks more like the American drain. This is the insider's truth. The truth few admit out loud, but millions live in silence. Hard work alone no longer guarantees a life worth living. And if the collapse of work itself is not enough, the final sign will deliver the deepest cut, a collapse of trust. Because when people stop believing bills will be paid, services will arrive, and society will function, that is when collapse ceases to be temporary. It becomes permanent. Every collapse has a final stage. It is not when the bills arrive, or when the shelves empty, or when the jobs vanish. The final stage comes when trust itself collapses, when people stop believing the system will deliver what it promises. That is the point of no return. For decades, Americans believed the lights would come on when the switch was flipped, that water would run when the tap was turned, that the bus would arrive when scheduled, that the hospital would take them in when sick. These small assurances were the invisible glue that held society together. But in 2025, that glue is dissolving. Streetlights stay dark for weeks because city crews cannot keep up. Water mains burst and remain unrepaired, leaving neighborhoods under boil water advisories. Public transit routes vanish overnight, stranding workers who depended on them. Police departments shrink, response times stretch, and communities begin to feel lawless. Schools cut days, libraries shutter, and parks are abandoned. The signs of trust reversal are everywhere. Families no longer assume their paychecks will cover expenses, they no longer assume pensions will be paid, or that social programs will be funded. More than 70% of Americans now tell pollsters they believe the country is on the wrong track. It is not just pessimism. It is a lived recognition that the services and protections that once defined American life are no longer reliable. When that faith breaks, collapse ceases to be temporary hardship. It becomes permanent decline. Because once people stop believing the system works, they adapt to dysfunction as the new normal. They keep candles for the power outages. They dig bottled water wells for the tap. They walk, or hitch rides, or simply stop going places. Collapse settles into the daily routine. This is the moment when a nation slips from first world to third world conditions, without fanfare, without drama, without rescue. The trust reversal is silent, but absolute. And this is the warning. America's collapse is not just about rising bills or crowded shelters. It is about the loss of confidence in the very idea of America, a place where work was rewarded, services delivered, and the future promised. Without that trust, the collapse is no longer coming. It has already arrived. 10 signs. 10 warnings carved into the daily lives of millions of Americans. Utility bills that no longer get paid. Grocery aisles that feel like luxury markets. Rent checks that swallow half an income and still leave families and cars in tents. Medical care reduced to a gamble of pills cut in half and hospitals shuttered. Paychecks that rise on paper but shrink in reality. Childcare that costs more than college, locking parents out of the workforce. Debt spirals that turn households into balance sheets of despair. Evictions spreading not at the margins, but through the very heart of the middle class. Workers chasing second and third jobs, trading time for exhaustion. And finally, the quiet collapse of trust, when Americans stop believing their nation can provide the basics of modern life. This is not the story of tomorrow. It is the story of now. And if these signs surround you, you are already living the collapse. Subscribe, stay with us, and see what comes next, because the unraveling of everyday life has only just begun.